The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Windsor Castle as Princess Anne made her way through the ancient corridors. Her riding boots clicked against the polished stone floors with the same determined rhythm that had marked her steps for decades. At 73, she remained as formidable as ever, her silver hair pulled back in her signature style, her posture straight despite the weight of royal duty that had pressed down on the family for months. The castle felt different these days. There was an undercurrent of tension that even the most casual observer could sense. The staff moved with careful precision, their voices lowered in hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when any member of the royal family approached. It had been building for weeks, this strange atmosphere, ever since the incident at the charity gala that no one spoke about directly but everyone seemed to know about. Anne paused outside the morning room, where she knew Kate would be having her breakfast. The Princess of Wales had been staying at Windsor more frequently lately, ostensibly to be closer to the king during his recovery. But Anne suspected there were other reasons. Kate had always been resilient, but even she seemed to be feeling the strain of recent events. The constant scrutiny, the whispered conversations, the careful navigation of family politics that had grown increasingly complex. Through the slightly open door, Anne could hear the gentle clink of china and the rustle of newspaper pages. Kate had always preferred to start her day quietly, away from the immediate demands of royal life, gathering her thoughts before facing whatever challenges lay ahead. It was a habit Anne respected, and one that reminded her of her own mother's morning routines in the years before her passing. The sound of approaching footsteps made Anne turn. James Parker, one of the senior protection officers, was walking toward her with the measured stride of someone bearing uncomfortable news. His face wore the carefully neutral expression that all the security staff had perfected, but Anne had been around long enough to read the subtle signs of concern. "Your Royal Highness," James said quietly, offering a respectful nod. "Might I have a word?" Anne stepped away from the morning room door, not wanting to disturb Kate's peaceful moment. They walked a few paces down the corridor, past portraits of long-dead monarchs who had faced their own share of family dramas and political intrigue. The morning light streaming through the tall windows caught the dust motes dancing in the air, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere that belied the gravity of whatever James needed to discuss. "What is it?" Anne asked, her voice direct as always. She had never been one for unnecessary pleasantries, particularly when serious matters were at hand. James glanced around to ensure they were truly alone before speaking. "There's been another incident, ma'am." Last night at the embassy reception, Tom Parker Bowles was there, and there was an exchange with some members of the press. "It's complicated." Anne felt her jaw tighten slightly. Tom, Camilla's son from her first marriage, had always been something of a wild card in the royal equation. While he generally stayed out of the limelight and maintained his own career as a food writer and critic, his proximity to the royal family meant that his actions inevitably reflected on the crown. When he chose to make those actions deliberately provocative, as he had been doing with increasing frequency, it created problems that rippled far beyond his personal sphere. "What exactly happened?" Anne asked, though she suspected she already knew the general nature of the problem. Tom had been growing bolder in his comments about various members of the family, particularly Kate, and his mother's position as queen consort seemed to have given him a sense of protection that was proving dangerous. He was overheard making some rather pointed comments about the Princess of Wales, about her background, shall we say. The conversation was recorded by several people present, and while nothing has been published yet, the palace press office has been fielding calls since early this morning. Anne closed her eyes briefly. This was exactly what they didn't need. Not now. The family was still recovering from the various scandals and controversies of recent years, and public opinion, while generally favorable toward Kate, could shift quickly when family dynamics became public entertainment. Kate had worked tirelessly to prove herself worthy of her position, and the suggestion that she was somehow lacking because of her non-aristocratic background was not only cruel, but potentially damaging to the monarchy's carefully cultivated image of modernization and inclusivity. "Has the Princess of Wales been informed?" Anne asked. "Not yet, ma'am. We wanted to brief you first, given your relationship with the situation." Anne understood what he meant. She had become something of Kate's unofficial protector within the family structure, partly because of her own experience as someone who had always felt slightly outside the traditional royal mold, and partly because she recognized in Kate the kind of dedication and work ethic that she valued above all else. Kate didn't have the benefit of being born into the role which, in Anne's opinion, made her efforts all the more admirable. "I'll speak with her," Anne said. "What about damage control?" "The press office is working on it. But there's only so much they can do if people start talking publicly. And there's another complication." James paused, clearly reluctant to continue. "There are suggestions that this wasn't a spontaneous outburst. That it was calculated." The implication hung in the air between them. If Tom's comments were deliberate rather than merely careless, it suggested a level of coordination or planning that made the situation far more serious. It raised questions about who might have encouraged such behavior and what the ultimate goal might be. Anne had been navigating royal politics for her entire life, but the dynamics had become increasingly complex in recent years. The introduction of new family members through marriage, the changing expectations of public service, and the constant pressure of media attention had created an environment where every word and action was analyzed for hidden meaning. What had once been private family disagreements now played out on a public stage, with consequences that extended far beyond hurt feelings or wounded pride. "I need to know everything," Anne said firmly. "Every detail of what was said, who was present, and any indication of whether this was planned or spontaneous. And I want a full briefing on any other incidents involving Tom Parker Bowles over the past 6 months." "Yes, ma'am. I'll have that prepared within the hour." As James walked away, Anne remained standing in the corridor, looking out through one of the tall windows at the grounds beyond. The perfectly maintained garden stretched out before her, a testament to centuries of royal tradition and continuity. But beneath that surface beauty lay the same complex network of relationships and rivalries that had always characterized royal life. She thought about Kate, sitting in the morning room with her tea and newspapers, probably reviewing her schedule for the day and preparing for whatever public appearances lay ahead. Kate had thrown herself into royal duties with an enthusiasm that sometimes surprised even Anne, who had always taken a workmanlike approach to her own responsibilities. But there was something different about Kate's dedication, something that spoke to a deep desire to prove herself worthy of the trust that had been placed in her. The irony wasn't lost on Anne that Kate, who had married into the family, often demonstrated more commitment to royal values than some who had been born into it. She had never complained about the restrictions of royal life, never sought special treatment or consideration, and never allowed personal difficulties to interfere with her public duties. In Anne's view, these qualities made her invaluable to the future of the monarchy, and anyone who sought to undermine her was, by extension, undermining the institution itself. The sound of footsteps approaching made Anne turn once again. This time it was Sarah, Kate's private secretary, hurrying down the corridor with the kind of purposeful stride that indicated urgent business. Sarah had been with Kate for several years and had proven herself to be both discreet and fiercely loyal, qualities that Anne appreciated. "Your Royal Highness," Sarah said, slightly out of breath. "I was looking for you. There's been a development regarding this morning's situation." "What kind of development?" "One of the guests at last night's reception has contacted the palace directly, Lady Morrison. She says she has video footage of the incident and wanted to provide it to us before making any decisions about what to do with it." Anne knew Lady Morrison slightly. She was the wife of a prominent businessman and had always been supportive of the royal family. The fact that she had reached out directly suggested that what she had witnessed was significant enough to warrant intervention. "Have you spoken to the Princess of Wales about any of this?" "Not yet. I didn't want to disturb her morning routine without having all the facts." Anne appreciated Sarah's consideration, but she knew that Kate would need to be informed soon. As the target of whatever Tom Parker Bowles had said, she had a right to know what they were dealing with, and more importantly, she needed to be prepared for any public fallout that might result. "Arrange for Lady Morrison to bring the footage here this afternoon," quietly. "And ask the Princess of Wales if she would join me in my office after lunch. Don't mention why, just say I'd like to discuss some upcoming engagements. Of course, Your Royal Highness." As Sarah hurried away to make the necessary arrangements, Anne finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of frustration that had been building since James first approached her. This wasn't just about one inappropriate comment or one moment of poor judgment. This was about the ongoing challenge of maintaining family unity while protecting the institution of the monarchy from internal threats. She had spent her entire life watching the delicate balance between personal relationships and public duty, seeing how private grievances could explode into public scandals that damaged not just individuals but the crown itself. Her parents had navigated these challenges with varying degrees of success, and she had learned from their experiences both what to do and what to avoid. But this situation felt different somehow. There was a calculated quality to recent events that suggested more than just personal animosity or casual thoughtlessness. Someone was deliberately trying to create problems for Kate, and by extension for William and their children. The question was who was behind it and what they hoped to accomplish. Anne made her way back toward the morning room, intending to check on Kate without revealing the morning's developments. As she approached the door, she could hear the faint sound of Kate's voice, apparently speaking on the phone. The tone was professional but warm, the kind of voice Kate used when discussing charitable work or public engagements. Through the slightly open door, Anne caught a glimpse of Kate sitting by the window, her dark hair catching the morning light as she gestured gracefully while speaking. She looked composed and confident, completely unaware of the storm that was potentially brewing around her. For a moment, Anne felt a fierce protective instinct that surprised her with its intensity. Kate had become more than just a daughter-in-law to the family. She had become a symbol of the monarchy's ability to evolve and adapt to changing times. Her grace under pressure, her dedication to duty, and her genuine warmth with the public had made her one of the most respected members of the royal family. The idea that someone was deliberately trying to undermine her was not just personally offensive to Anne, but professionally concerning as well. The morning sun continued to stream through the castle windows, casting everything in a golden glow that made the ancient stones look warm and welcoming. But beneath that surface beauty, Anne knew, lay the same currents of ambition, jealousy, and political calculation that had shaped royal life for centuries. The only difference was that now, in the age of instant communication and social media, private moments could become public scandals in a matter of hours. As Kate finished her phone call and began to gather her papers, Anne stepped back from the doorway. She would wait until this afternoon to share what she had learned, giving herself time to gather more information and develop a strategy for dealing with whatever was coming. But one thing was certain. She would not allow Kate to face this challenge alone. The protection of family members had always been one of Anne's unspoken responsibilities, something she had taken on naturally as the daughter of a reigning monarch and the sister of a future king. But her commitment to protecting Kate went beyond family duty. It was about preserving the integrity of an institution that had shaped her entire life, and ensuring that it continued to serve the people who looked to it for stability and continuity. As she walked back through the castle corridors, Anne's mind was already working through the various scenarios they might face and the responses that would be most effective. She had learned long ago that the key to surviving royal scandals was to respond quickly, decisively, and with complete unity. Whatever Tom Parker Bowles thought he was accomplishing with his comments, he was about to learn that attacking one member of the family meant facing the collective strength of all of them. The morning was still young, and there was much work to be done. But Anne felt a familiar sense of determination settling over her, the same feeling that had carried her through decades of public service and personal challenges. This was what she had been trained for her entire life, protecting the monarchy and the people who served it, regardless of the personal cost or the complexity of the situation they faced. The afternoon light filtered through the heavy curtains of Princess Anne's private office as she reviewed the documents that James Parker had delivered earlier. The file was thicker than she had expected, containing not just details of the previous night's incident, but a troubling pattern of behavior that stretched back several months. Each report painted a picture of someone who was becoming increasingly bold in his criticism of the royal family, particularly Kate. Anne set down the last page and rubbed her temples. The headache that had been building since morning was now a steady throb behind her eyes. She had seen enough family dramas over the years to recognize the signs of something more serious than simple disagreement or personality clash. This felt orchestrated, deliberate, and potentially damaging in ways that extended far beyond hurt feelings. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, straightening in her chair. Kate entered with her characteristic grace, her smile warm but slightly questioning. She was dressed in a navy blue dress that was both elegant and practical, the kind of outfit that could transition from private meetings to public appearances without missing a beat. Her hair was styled in loose waves that framed her face, and despite whatever stress she might be feeling, she looked composed and ready for whatever the afternoon might bring. "You wanted to see me about the upcoming engagements?" Kate asked, settling into the chair across from Anne's desk with the easy familiarity that had developed between them over the years. Anne studied Kate's face for a moment, looking for any sign that she might already know about the morning's developments. But Kate's expression was open and expectant, with no hint of the wariness that would suggest she had heard whispers or received concerning phone calls. "Actually," Anne said carefully, "there's something else we need to discuss. Something that happened last night at the embassy reception." She watched as Kate's expression shifted slightly, becoming more alert but not yet concerned. Kate had learned to read the subtle signals that indicated when royal business was about to become complicated, and Anne could see her mentally preparing for whatever was coming. "Tom Parker Bowles was there," Anne continued, choosing her words carefully. "He made some comments about you that were inappropriate. Several people heard them, and there's a possibility they were recorded." Kate's face remained remarkably composed, but Anne noticed the slight tightening around her eyes that indicated she was processing this information and its potential implications. It was one of the things Anne admired about Kate, her ability to remain calm under pressure while her mind worked through all the possible consequences of any given situation. "What kind of comments?" Kate asked quietly. Anne opened the file on her desk and found the relevant page. "According to the witnesses, he made references to your background, suggesting that you weren't suitable for your position. The exact quote was something about commoners who think they understand royal duty, and a suggestion that your charitable work was performative rather than genuine." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Kate looked out the window for a moment, her jaw set in a way that Anne recognized as controlled anger. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but there was steel underneath. "I see. And what's the palace's response going to be?" "That depends partly on you," Anne said. "We need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with before we decide how to proceed. Lady Morrison was present last night, and she's coming here this afternoon with video footage of the incident. Once we know exactly what was said and how it was said, we can determine the best course of action." Kate nodded slowly, her mind clearly working through the various scenarios. Anne could see her weighing the personal hurt against the potential public impact, considering not just her own reputation but the effect on William, their children, and the broader royal family. "This isn't the first time, is it?" Kate asked. It wasn't really a question. Anne's respect for Kate's perceptiveness increased even further. "No, it's not. There have been several incidents over the past few months. Nothing quite this public, but a pattern of comments and behavior that suggests this is becoming a deliberate campaign rather than isolated incidents." The weight of this revelation settled between them. Both women understood the implications of a coordinated effort to undermine Kate's position. It raised questions about motivation, about who might be encouraging such behavior, and about what the ultimate goal might be. "Has William been told?" Kate asked. "Not yet. I wanted to speak with you first." Kate was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the gardens beyond. Anne could see her working through her emotions, separating the personal hurt from the professional challenge. It was something all members of the royal family had to learn, how to function when private pain became public spectacle. "I've worked very hard to earn my place in this family," Kate said finally, her voice soft but firm. "I've never asked for special treatment or consideration. I've tried to prove through my actions that I understand what this role requires, and that I'm worthy of the trust that's been placed in me." "And you have," Anne said without hesitation. "Anyone who questions your dedication or your commitment to this family and this institution is either blind or deliberately obtuse." Kate looked back at Anne with surprise and gratitude. Anne had never been one for effusive praise or emotional declarations, so her straightforward affirmation carried particular weight. "Thank you," Kate said simply. "That means more than you know." Another knock at the door interrupted them. This time, it was Sarah, Kate's private secretary, accompanied by a woman in her 60s whom Anne recognized as Lady Morrison. They had obviously arrived for their afternoon appointment, though Anne had hoped to have more time to prepare Kate for what she was about to see and hear. "Lady Morrison," Anne said, rising from her chair. "Thank you for coming." Lady Morrison was clearly nervous, her hands fidgeting with her handbag as she glanced between Anne and Kate. She was someone who had always supported the royal family from a distance, attending events and making donations but never seeking the spotlight for herself. The fact that she was here now, inserting herself into what could become a significant scandal, spoke to how serious she felt the situation was. "Your Royal Highnesses," Lady Morrison said, offering a small curtsy. "I must say, I was quite shocked by what I witnessed last night. I've known the Parker Bowles family for many years, and this kind of behavior is, well, it's not what I would have expected." Anne gestured for everyone to sit, creating a small circle that would allow for private conversation. Sarah took a chair slightly apart from the others, her notebook ready, but her expression indicating that she understood the sensitive nature of what they were about to discuss. "Perhaps you could tell us exactly what you saw and heard," Anne said gently. Lady Morrison nodded and reached into her handbag, pulling out her phone. "I was standing near the reception area when Mr. Parker Bowles approached a small group that included several journalists and a few other guests. He seemed to have had quite a bit to drink, though he wasn't obviously intoxicated." She paused, glancing at Kate with obvious sympathy. "He began talking about the royal family at first in general terms, but then someone mentioned the Princess of Wales's upcoming charity gala, and his tone changed completely." Anne felt Kate tense beside her, though her expression remained carefully neutral. This was the moment of truth, when they would discover exactly how damaging Tom's comments had been. He said. Lady Morrison looked at her phone screen, clearly reading from notes she had made. "He said that it was amusing to watch someone with no real understanding of aristocratic society try to play the role of royal patron. He suggested that the princess's charitable work was essentially an act, designed to win public approval rather than to actually help anyone." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Anne felt her own anger rising, but she forced herself to remain calm and analytical. These weren't just personal insults. They were attacks on Kate's credibility and effectiveness in her role, potentially undermining years of careful work to establish her credentials as a serious working royal. "Was this filmed?" Anne asked. "Yes, unfortunately. Several people were recording the conversation, initially because they were amused by his stories about food critics and restaurant reviews. But when he began talking about the royal family, people didn't immediately stop recording." Lady Morrison touched her phone screen, and Anne could see that she had a video file ready to play. "I managed to capture most of his comments about the princess, though the audio quality isn't perfect because of the background noise." Anne looked at Kate, who nodded slightly. They needed to know exactly what they were dealing with, regardless of how unpleasant it might be to hear. The video began playing, showing a crowded reception area with the sound of conversation and clinking glasses in the background. Tom Parker Bowles was visible in the center of a small group, gesturing expressively as he spoke. His voice was clear enough to understand, though Lady Morrison had been right about the background noise making some words difficult to catch. For the first minute, he was telling an entertaining story about a disastrous restaurant review, and the group around him was laughing and engaged. But then someone mentioned Kate's upcoming engagement, and his entire demeanor changed. His voice became sharper, more cutting, and his gestures more aggressive. "Oh yes, the charity gala," they heard him say. "It's quite touching, really. Watching someone try so hard to fit into a world they'll never really understand. All that earnest dedication to causes she probably never heard of before she married into the family." The group around him had grown quieter, some people clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. But Tom continued, apparently oblivious to the changing atmosphere. "You have to admire the performance, though. All those carefully chosen outfits, all those practiced smiles for the cameras. She certainly learned how to play the part of the caring royal patron, even if she doesn't quite understand what she's playing at." Anne watched Kate's face as they listened to these words. Kate's expression remained composed, but Anne could see the hurt in her eyes, the way her hands tightened slightly in her lap. These weren't just cruel words. They were designed to undermine everything Kate had worked to achieve, to suggest that her entire royal persona was artificial and calculated. The video continued for another minute, with Tom making additional comments about social climbing and pretending to understand duty and service. By the end, several people in the group had quietly moved away, clearly uncomfortable with what they were hearing. When the recording ended, the room was silent, except for the tick of the antique clock on Anne's mantelpiece. Lady Morrison put her phone away and looked apologetically at Kate. "I'm so sorry you had to hear that, Your Royal Highness. I debated whether to bring this forward at all, but I felt that you should know what was being said and, more importantly, who was saying it." Kate finally spoke, her voice steady despite the obvious emotional toll of hearing such personal attacks. "Thank you, Lady Morrison. I appreciate your courage in bringing this to our attention. What I don't understand," Lady Morrison continued, "is why he would say such things publicly. Surely he must realize that this kind of talk would get back to the palace." That was exactly the question that had been bothering Anne since the morning's briefing. Tom Parker Bowles was not stupid, nor was he naive about how royal protocol worked. The fact that he had made these comments in such a public setting, with journalists present and cameras recording, suggested either a shocking lack of judgment or a deliberate attempt to create exactly the kind of scandal they were now facing. "Has anyone else contacted you about this footage?" Anne asked. "Not yet, but I suspect it's only a matter of time. I've heard that several other people recorded parts of the conversation, and I know that at least 2 journalists were taking notes." Anne exchanged a meaningful look with Sarah, who immediately understood what needed to happen next. The palace press office would need to be alerted, legal would need to review their options, and they would need to develop a comprehensive response strategy before this story broke in the media. "Lady Morrison," Anne said formally, "would you be willing to provide a written statement about what you witnessed? We may need it for our records." "Of course, Your Royal Highness. Whatever I can do to help." As Lady Morrison was shown out by Sarah, Anne turned back to Kate, who was sitting very still and staring out the window again. The afternoon light was beginning to fade, casting long shadows across the room and giving everything a somewhat melancholy atmosphere. "How are you feeling?" Anne asked quietly. Kate was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Angry," she said finally, "and disappointed. I thought we had moved past this kind of thing." Anne understood what she meant. For all the challenges the royal family had faced over the years, there had been a sense that they were moving toward a more modern, more inclusive version of the monarchy. Kate's successful integration into the family had been seen as proof that the institution could evolve and adapt to changing social expectations. "We have moved past it," Anne said firmly. "This is the last gasp of an outdated way of thinking, nothing more." "But it's still damaging," Kate pointed out. "Even if most people don't believe it, the fact that it's being said publicly creates doubt. It makes people question whether I really do belong here, whether I really am committed to this role." Anne leaned forward in her chair, fixing Kate with the kind of direct gaze that had intimidated government ministers and foreign dignitaries for decades. "Kate," she said, using the informal name deliberately, "in 40 years of public service, I have never seen anyone work harder or with more genuine dedication than you have. Anyone who questions your commitment or your suitability for this role is either ignorant or deliberately malicious." The words seemed to steady Kate, bringing some color back to her cheeks and straightening her shoulders slightly. "Thank you," Kate said again. "But what do we do now? How do we respond to this?" Anne was already formulating a plan, drawing on decades of experience in crisis management and public relations. The key was to respond quickly and decisively, to control the narrative before it could spiral out of control. "First," she said, "we make sure William knows what's happening. He needs to hear this from us, not from the press or from gossip. Second, we coordinate with the palace press office to develop a unified response. And third," Anne paused, her expression becoming more determined. "Third, we make it clear that attacks on one member of this family are attacks on all of us." Kate looked surprised at the vehemence in Anne's voice, but also grateful. The royal family's public displays of unity had always been one of their greatest strengths, and knowing that she would not have to face this challenge alone made an enormous difference. "What about Tom himself?" Kate asked. Do we confront him directly? Anne considered this carefully. Direct confrontation could escalate the situation, but it might also be necessary to make clear that his behavior was unacceptable and would have consequences. "Let me handle that," she said finally. "There are certain conversations that are better had between people of the same generation." As the afternoon continued to fade into evening, Anne felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about defending Kate from unfair attacks. It was about protecting the institution they all served and ensuring that it continued to command the respect and support of the British people. The challenges facing the royal family had evolved over the years, but the fundamental responsibility remained the same: to serve the nation with dignity, dedication, and unity. Anyone who threatened that unity from within or without would find themselves facing the collective strength of an institution that had survived for over 1,000 years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new decisions, but tonight there was work to be done, plans to be made, alliances to be strengthened, and a clear message to be sent that the royal family stood together, regardless of the threats they faced. The secure telephone in Princess Anne's private study rang at precisely 8 o'clock that evening. She had been expecting the call since sending word to William's private secretary 2 hours earlier. The Prince of Wales was currently in Scotland on a series of official engagements, but she knew he would make time for an urgent family matter regardless of his schedule. "Anne?" William's voice came through clearly despite the distance. She could hear the concern already present in his tone. Her message had been deliberately vague but had conveyed the urgency of the situation. "Thank you for calling back so quickly. I'm afraid we have a situation that requires your attention." Anne had spent the time since Kate left her office carefully planning this conversation. William needed to know what had happened, but she also needed to gauge his reaction and ensure that any response they developed would have his full support. The Prince of Wales had always been protective of his wife, but he was also acutely aware of the broader implications of any family conflict that became public. "What kind of situation?" William asked, and Anne could hear him settling into a more private space, probably his temporary office at Balmoral. "It concerns Tom Parker Bowles and some comments he made last night about Kate. Comments that were recorded and witnessed by several people, including journalists." The silence that followed was telling. Anne could almost hear William processing this information, understanding immediately why this was serious enough to warrant an urgent call. What exactly did he say? Anne relayed the key points of Tom's comments, keeping her voice steady and factual. She had learned long ago that emotional reactions, while understandable, were less helpful than clear analysis when dealing with family crises. But she could hear William's breathing change as she spoke, the barely controlled anger that he was working to keep in check. "That bastard," William said finally, his voice low and tight with fury. "I'm sorry, but there's no other word for it. How dare he attack Kate like that?" "The question now," Anne said carefully, "is how we respond. This could become public within days, possibly hours. We need a strategy. Have you spoken to Kate about this?" "Yes. She's handling it with her usual grace, but she's obviously hurt, and she's concerned about the impact on the family's reputation." Anne heard William exhale slowly, a sound she recognized as him forcing himself to think strategically rather than simply reacting emotionally. "What are our options?" "Several. We could issue a formal denial or correction through the palace press office. We could have legal review whether his comments constitute defamation. We could arrange for private conversations to make clear that this behavior is unacceptable. Or we could choose to ignore it entirely and hope it doesn't gain traction." "Ignoring it isn't an option," William said immediately. "Kate has worked too hard and done too much for this family to let someone attack her credibility without consequence." Anne had expected this response, and she agreed with it, but she also knew that any action they took needed to be measured and strategic rather than purely reactive. "There's another factor we need to consider," she said carefully. "This wasn't an isolated incident. Our security team has documented a pattern of increasingly critical comments from Tom over the past several months. This suggests something more coordinated than simple poor judgment. The implication hung between them. If Tom's behavior was being encouraged or coordinated by someone else, it raised much more serious questions about motivation and potential ongoing threats to family unity. Who would benefit from undermining Kate's position? William asked, though Anne suspected he already knew the answer. That's what we need to determine. But first, we need to deal with the immediate crisis. They spent the next 20 minutes discussing various response strategies, weighing the potential consequences of each approach. William's protective instincts were clearly engaged, but he was also thinking like a future king, understanding that every decision had implications that extended far beyond the immediate family circle. "I want to cut short the Scotland visit and come back tomorrow," William said finally. "That might actually make things worse," Anne pointed out. "If you suddenly change your schedule, it will look like this is a major crisis. Better to maintain normal appearances while we handle things quietly." But Kate shouldn't have to deal with this alone. She's not alone. I'm here, and so is the entire palace apparatus. Sometimes the best way to show that something isn't a crisis is to treat it as routine business. William was quiet for a moment, clearly struggling with the decision to stay away while his wife faced public attack. Anne understood his instincts, but she also knew that royal crises required careful management rather than emotional responses. "All right," he said finally, "but I want daily updates, and if this escalates in any way, I'm coming back immediately." "Agreed." "And, William, we will handle this. Kate is stronger than people realize, and she has more support within the family than Tom Parker Bowles apparently understands." After ending the call with William, Anne sat back in her chair and considered her next move. The evening was growing dark outside her window, and the castle had settled into its nighttime rhythm, but her work was far from over. She picked up the phone again and dialed a number from memory. The call was answered on the second ring by a voice she had known for over 30 years. "Charles, it's Anne. I need a favor." Sir Charles Whitman had been the royal family's legal advisor for decades, handling everything from constitutional questions to personal legal matters with discretion and expertise. If anyone could advise them on their options regarding Tom's comments, it was him. "Of course, Your Royal Highness. What can I do for you?" Anne outlined the situation, sharing the key details of Tom's comments and the evidence they had gathered. Charles listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions that showed he was already thinking through the legal implications. "Defamation is certainly a possibility," he said when she finished. "The comments about the Princess of Wales's charitable work being performative rather than genuine could be seen as damaging to her professional reputation, and the broader suggestions about her suitability for her role are clearly intended to harm her standing. But would a legal response be advisable? That depends on what outcome you're hoping to achieve. If the goal is simply to stop this kind of behavior, a formal warning might be sufficient. If you want to send a broader message about the consequences of attacking working royals, a more public response might be necessary." Anne appreciated Charles's analytical approach. Legal action was always an option, but it came with risks as well as benefits. A public legal battle could draw more attention to Tom's comments than they might otherwise receive. What about his legal exposure? Could he face consequences regardless of whether we take action? Potentially. If his comments are seen as deliberately false and damaging, he could face defamation claims. And if there's evidence of coordination or planning, it could constitute harassment or a pattern of behavior that warrants intervention. This was useful information, but Anne knew that legal remedies were only part of the solution. The more important question was how to protect Kate's reputation and ensure that this kind of attack didn't succeed in undermining her position or effectiveness. "I'll need a full legal analysis by tomorrow morning," she told Charles. "All options, with recommendations based on likely outcomes." "Of course. I'll have my team work on it tonight." Anne's next call was to palace security, specifically to James Parker. She needed to understand whether there were any security implications to Tom's behavior and whether there were additional protective measures that should be put in place. "James, it's Princess Anne. I need an updated assessment of the Tom Parker Bowles situation, with particular attention to any security concerns." "Yes, ma'am. We've been monitoring the situation since this morning. So far, there's no indication of any direct threat to physical security. But there are concerns about the broader pattern of behavior." "What kind of concerns?" The escalating nature of his comments suggests that he may be testing boundaries or building up to something more significant. We've also noticed increased contact between him and certain members of the press who have been critical of the royal family in the past. This was troubling news. If Tom was deliberately cultivating relationships with hostile journalists, it suggested a level of planning and coordination that went well beyond spontaneous poor judgment. "I want complete monitoring of his communications and movements," Anne said. "Not surveillance, but awareness of his activities and associations. If he's planning something more significant, we need advance warning." "Understood. We'll coordinate with the Metropolitan Police Protection Unit to ensure comprehensive coverage." Anne ended the call and walked to the window, looking out at the darkened grounds of Windsor Castle. The ancient stones seemed to absorb the night, creating an atmosphere of timeless solidity that had comforted her throughout her life. But tonight, she was acutely aware of how fragile that sense of security could be. The royal family's strength had always come from their unity and their shared commitment to duty above personal interest. When that unity was threatened, either from external attack or internal division, the entire institution was weakened. Tom's behavior represented exactly the kind of internal threat that could do lasting damage if not addressed quickly and decisively. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Sarah entered, carrying a leather folder that Anne recognized as containing the day's correspondence and urgent messages. "I'm sorry to disturb you so late, Your Royal Highness, but there are several items that require your immediate attention." Anne gestured for Sarah to sit and opened the folder. The top document was a preliminary report from the Palace Press Office, detailing the media inquiries they had already received about the previous night's embassy reception. It seemed as school destinations. Its pockets were first purchased by City of Tom Parker. This is the book. It's about history. 3 different news organizations had contacted them, with questions about comments made by Mr. Tom Parker Bowles. Regarding the Princess of Wales, "How much time do we have before this becomes public?" Anne asked. "Based on the inquiries and our understanding of news cycles, probably 24 to 48 hours. Maybe less if someone decides to run with it as breaking news." This compressed their timeline significantly. Any response they developed would need to be implemented quickly, before the narrative could be established by hostile sources. The second document in the folder was more encouraging. It was a message from Lady Morrison, providing additional details about the previous night's events that she had remembered since their afternoon meeting. According to her supplementary account, several other guests had expressed disgust at Tom's comments, with at least 2 people telling him directly that his behavior was inappropriate. "This is helpful," Anne said, reading through the details. "It shows that his comments were not well received, even among people who might be expected to be sympathetic to criticism of the royal family." The third document was the most intriguing. It was a brief note from one of the palace's informal contacts within London's social circles, reporting that Tom had been seen meeting several times in recent weeks with Marcus Henderson, a public relations consultant, known for his work with clients seeking to damage the reputations of public figures. Anne set down the document and looked at Sarah with raised eyebrows. This was the first concrete evidence that Tom's behavior might be part of a coordinated campaign rather than simply personal animosity or poor judgment. "How reliable is this information?" "Very reliable. The source has provided accurate intelligence for us in the past, and they were quite specific about the timing and locations of these meetings." Anne felt the pieces of the puzzle beginning to form a clearer picture. Tom's increasingly aggressive comments, the public nature of his latest attack, and now evidence of professional consultation, all pointed to a deliberate strategy designed to undermine Kate's position and credibility. "I want everything we can find on Marcus Henderson," she said. "Client lists, recent campaigns, any connections to anti-monarchy groups or Republican organizations. If this is a professional attack, we need to understand who's behind it and what they're ultimately trying to accomplish." Sarah made notes in her own folder, clearly understanding the urgency of these requests. "There's one more thing," Sarah said carefully. "The Princess of Wales has asked to see you again tomorrow morning. She says she has some ideas about how to respond to the situation." Anne was curious about what Kate might be thinking. Throughout their afternoon conversation, Kate had been more reactive than strategic, understandably focused on the personal hurt rather than the broader implications. But Kate had always been someone who processed challenges carefully before developing her own response. "Of course. What time?" 9 o'clock, if that's convenient. Perfect. And Sarah? I want you to coordinate with William's office to ensure he has all the same information we're gathering. He needs to be fully briefed on every development. As Sarah left with her instructions, Anne returned to the window and the darkened grounds beyond. The situation was more complex than she had initially realized, but it was also more manageable. A professional attack campaign could be countered with professional defensive strategies. The key was to respond quickly, comprehensively, and with the full weight of the royal family's resources. She thought about Kate, probably at home with her children, trying to maintain normalcy while processing the day's revelations. Kate had shown remarkable resilience throughout her years as a working royal, but this kind of personal attack was particularly insidious because it targeted the very qualities that made her effective in her role. Anne had spent her entire life defending the monarchy against various threats, but she had rarely felt as personally invested in the outcome as she did now. This wasn't just about protecting an institution or managing a crisis. It was about protecting someone she had grown to respect and admire, someone whose success was vital to the future of the royal family. The clock on her desk chimed 11, reminding her how late the evening had become. But there was one more call she needed to make, one more piece of the response strategy that needed to be put in place. She picked up the phone and dialed a number that connected her directly to Buckingham Palace's night duty officer. When the call was answered, she spoke with the authority of someone who had been making such calls for over 40 years. "This is Princess Anne. I need you to arrange a private meeting for tomorrow afternoon. 3 o'clock. The participants should include myself, the Princess of Wales, Sir Charles Whitman, and Commander Reynolds from Palace Security. Location should be my private office at Windsor. Of course, Your Royal Highness. Should this meeting appear on any official schedules? No. This is a private family matter." As she ended the final call of the evening, Anne felt the satisfaction that came from taking decisive action in the face of a crisis. The challenges ahead were significant, but they were not insurmountable. The royal family had survived much worse threats than one embittered stepson with professional public relations advice. Tomorrow would bring new developments and new decisions, but tonight the foundation for their response had been laid. Kate would not face this attack alone, and those responsible would learn that undermining one member of the royal family meant facing the collective strength and determination of all of them. The castle settled around her as she finally prepared to retire for the evening, its ancient stones holding the same quiet strength that had sustained the monarchy through centuries of challenge and change. Whatever Tom Parker Bowles and his advisors thought they could accomplish, they were about to discover that some institutions were stronger than any individual attack could weaken. The morning mist clung to the grounds of Windsor Castle as Princess Anne made her way to the stables for her daily ride. Despite the crisis unfolding around the family, she had maintained her routine. Experience had taught her that consistency and normalcy were essential during turbulent times, both for personal stability and for the message it sent to staff and observers. As she checked her horse's tack, her mind was already working through the day ahead. The 9 o'clock meeting with Kate would be crucial. The afternoon strategy session would determine their response plan, and somewhere in between, she would need to have what was likely to be a very unpleasant conversation with Tom Parker Bowles himself. Her phone buzzed with an encrypted message from James Parker. The overnight intelligence gathering had yielded significant results. Marcus Henderson, the public relations consultant, had indeed been working with Tom for several weeks, and their campaign appeared to be more extensive than anyone had initially realized. According to the preliminary report, Henderson specialized in what he called reputation erosion, a systematic approach to undermining public figures through carefully orchestrated negative publicity. His previous clients had included business rivals seeking to damage competitors and political operatives working to discredit opponents. The fact that he had been hired to target Kate suggested this was far more serious than family squabbling. Anne finished her ride and returned to the castle with new determination. If this was professional warfare, they would respond with professional precision. The royal family had survived much worse attacks over the centuries, but those had usually come from external enemies. Internal threats required different strategies and more delicate handling. At precisely 9 o'clock, Kate arrived at Anne's office. She looked composed but tired, and Anne suspected she had slept poorly after learning about the previous night's developments. Kate was carrying a leather portfolio, suggesting she had indeed spent time developing her own thoughts about how to proceed. "Good morning," Anne said, gesturing for Kate to take her usual chair. "How are you feeling?" "Determined," Kate replied without hesitation. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday about not allowing this kind of attack to succeed, and I believe there are ways we can turn this situation to our advantage. Anne raised an eyebrow. This was not what she had expected from someone who had been personally attacked in such a public way, but Kate's resilience had always been one of her strongest qualities. What did you have in mind? Kate opened her portfolio and pulled out several pages of handwritten notes. Anne could see that she had been working methodically through various scenarios and responses, approaching the problem with the same careful attention to detail that she brought to her official duties. First, Kate said, I think we need to understand that this attack is actually an opportunity to demonstrate exactly the qualities that Tom is claiming I don't possess. If I respond with dignity, professionalism, and genuine commitment to my charitable work, it will highlight the contrast between his behavior and what the royal family actually represents. Anne was impressed by both the strategic thinking and the emotional maturity this approach represented. Rather than simply defending against the attack, Kate was proposing to use it as a platform to reinforce her positive image. Second, Kate continued, I believe we should be proactive rather than reactive. Instead of just responding to his comments, we should create opportunities to showcase the depth and authenticity of my charitable commitments. I've been reviewing my upcoming engagements, and there are several that could be elevated or expanded to demonstrate exactly what genuine royal service looks like. This was brilliant strategy, Anne realized. By increasing rather than decreasing Kate's public profile in the wake of the attack, they would force the media and the public to focus on her actual work rather than on Tom's criticisms. What kind of expansions are you thinking about? The children's hospital visit next week could be extended to include a private meeting with families affected by the new treatment program we've been supporting. The education initiative launch could include testimonials from teachers and students who have benefited from our funding. The Veterans Support event could feature presentations from program participants, showing real, measurable outcomes. Anne studied Kate's notes, seeing how each proposed enhancement would provide concrete evidence of the impact and authenticity of her charitable work. It was exactly the kind of substantive response that would make Tom's attacks look shallow and unfounded. These are excellent ideas, Anne said, but they'll require careful coordination with the palace press office to ensure the message is communicated effectively. I've already spoken to Sarah about the logistics. She thinks we can implement most of these changes without making it obvious that we're responding to criticism. They'll just look like natural expansions of existing commitments. Anne felt a surge of pride in Kate's strategic thinking. This kind of sophisticated crisis management was exactly what the modern royal family needed, and it showed that Kate understood her role at a much deeper level than her critics realized. There's something else, Kate said, her expression becoming more serious. I want to know who's really behind this. Not just Tom, but whoever is advising him and funding this campaign. If this is part of a larger effort to undermine the monarchy, we need to understand the full scope of what we're facing. Actually, Anne said, we have some answers to those questions. She shared the overnight intelligence about Marcus Henderson and his reputation erosion strategies, watching as Kate's expression shifted from surprise to anger to cold determination. So this is a professional attack, Kate said when Anne finished. Someone hired a consultant to systematically destroy my reputation. It appears so. The question now is, who hired Henderson and what their ultimate goal might be? Kate was quiet for a moment, clearly processing the implications of organized opposition. Then her jaw set in the expression Anne had learned to recognize as Kate's most determined mood. Then we respond professionally, Kate said. If they want to make this a campaign, we'll run a better one. A knock at the door interrupted their planning session. James Parker entered with a folder that Anne immediately recognized as containing urgent intelligence updates. Your Royal Highness, he said to Anne, we have developments in the Henderson investigation. Anne gestured for him to continue, noting that Kate was listening with intense focus. We've identified the source of funding for Henderson's retainer. The payments are coming through a shell company, but we've traced them back to a group called the Republican Reform Institute. They're a relatively new organization that advocates for the abolition of the monarchy and the establishment of a directly elected head of state. The room fell silent as the implications of this revelation sank in. This wasn't personal animosity or family drama. It was political warfare aimed at undermining the constitutional monarchy itself. How long has this organization been active? Anne asked.
About 18 months, but they've become increasingly well-funded and organized in recent months. Our analysis suggests they're using attacks on individual royals as a way to erode public support for the institution as a whole.
Kate looked thoughtful rather than shocked. It makes sense, actually. They can't attack the monarchy directly without looking radical, so they attack the people who represent it. If they can make us look incompetent or inauthentic, it undermines the entire system. Anne was impressed by Kate's quick grasp of the political dynamics at play. This understanding would be crucial in developing an effective response strategy.
What else do we know about their operations?
Anne asked James. They're running what appears to be a coordinated campaign targeting several members of the royal family. The attack on the Princess of Wales is just one part of a larger strategy. We have evidence of similar operations being planned against other working royals. This expanded the scope of the threat significantly. If the Republican Reform Institute was targeting multiple family members, it represented a systematic attempt to destabilize the monarchy's public support. I want a full briefing on their activities and a threat assessment for all family members, Anne said. And I want it coordinated with the Metropolitan Police's protection units. Already in progress, ma'am. As James left to implement these instructions, Anne and Kate sat in thoughtful silence. The discovery that they were facing organized political opposition changed the nature of their response. This wasn't just about defending Kate's reputation. It was about defending the constitutional system itself. We need to bring William into this immediately, Anne said, and probably the king as well, depending on his health status. Agreed, Kate said. But we also need to be careful not to give this more attention than it deserves. If we respond too dramatically, we risk making them look more important and effective than they actually are. Anne was struck again by Kate's strategic sophistication. The balance between taking threats seriously and not amplifying them was always delicate, and Kate seemed to understand this instinctively. There's another factor we need to consider, Kate continued. If they're targeting multiple family members, they're probably looking for ways to create division within the family itself. The more we can demonstrate unity and mutual support, the more we undermine their strategy. This insight was particularly valuable. Anne had seen how external attacks could sometimes exacerbate internal tensions, and a conscious effort to present a united front would be essential. What are you thinking? Joint engagements, shared platforms, public displays of support and collaboration. If they want to attack individual royals, we make it clear that they're attacking the family as a whole. Anne nodded approvingly. That aligns well with your earlier idea about elevated charitable activities. We can showcase not just your individual work, but the collaborative nature of royal service. They spent the next hour developing a comprehensive response strategy that combined immediate defensive measures with longer-term positive initiatives. By the time they finished, Anne felt confident that they had developed a plan that would not only counter the current attacks, but also strengthen Kate's position for the future. At 2 o'clock, Anne received a call from Sir Charles Whitman with an update on the legal analysis they had requested. "We have strong grounds for defamation action," he reported. "Tom's comments about the princess's charitable work being performative rather than genuine are demonstrably false and clearly intended to damage her professional reputation. What would you recommend?" A formal warning letter as an initial step, making clear that further false statements will result in legal action. If the behavior continues, we can escalate to a cease and desist order and ultimately to a full defamation lawsuit. Anne discussed this with Kate, who was inclined to pursue the legal route vigorously. If this is part of a larger campaign, Kate reasoned, we need to establish clear consequences for attacking working royals. Otherwise, they'll just keep escalating. Anne agreed, though she was also conscious of the need to avoid making Tom or his supporters look like martyrs for a Republican cause. "Let's start with the warning letter," she decided. "But make sure it's strongly worded and leaves no doubt about our willingness to take further action." The 3 o'clock strategy meeting brought together all the key players in their response effort. In addition to Anne, Kate, Sir Charles, and Commander Reynolds from Palace Security, they were joined by Sarah and the deputy head of the Palace Press Office. The meeting lasted 2 hours and resulted in a comprehensive action plan that addressed both immediate and longer-term challenges. They would implement Kate's enhanced charitable activity schedule.
pursue legal action against Tom, coordinate with law enforcement on the broader security implications, and develop messaging strategies to reinforce the royal family's unity and effectiveness. As the meeting concluded, Anne felt satisfied that they had developed a robust response to what was clearly a serious threat. But she also knew that the most challenging part lay ahead, implementing their strategy while maintaining the dignity and effectiveness that the public expected from the royal family. That evening, as Anne reviewed the final details of their plan, she received an unexpected call from William in Scotland. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night," he said without preamble. "I want to make a public statement supporting Kate and condemning these attacks." Anne had been expecting this. William's protective instincts toward his wife were well known, and the revelation that the attacks were part of an organized political campaign would only intensify his desire to respond forcefully. "That's actually part of our strategy," Anne said, "but we want to coordinate it carefully with Kate's enhanced charitable activities. The goal is to show strength and unity without looking like we're overreacting to what most people will see as one person's poor judgment. What do you need from me? Continue with your Scotland schedule as planned, but be prepared to return quickly if needed. And when you do make a public statement, we want it to focus on Kate's accomplishments and dedication rather than on Tom's failings." They discussed the details of William's potential statement, ensuring that it would complement rather than overshadow their broader strategy. After ending the call, Anne walked to her window and looked out at the evening sky. The past 2 days had brought challenges she hadn't anticipated, but they had also revealed strengths within the family that gave her confidence about their ability to weather this storm. Kate's strategic thinking and emotional resilience had exceeded even Anne's high expectations. William's protective loyalty was balanced by his understanding of the broader political implications, and the palace staff had demonstrated their ability to gather intelligence and coordinate responses with professional efficiency. Tomorrow would bring the first test of their strategy, as Kate began implementing her enhanced charitable schedule, and the legal warning was delivered to Tom Parker Bowles. But tonight, Anne felt confident that they had laid the foundation for not just surviving this attack, but emerging from it stronger than before. The constitutional monarchy had faced many threats over the centuries, from external enemies and internal divisions alike, but it had endured because it was capable of adaptation, evolution, and determined defense of its core values. The Republican Reform Institute and their hired consultants were about to learn that some institutions were not easily undermined, especially when they were defended by people who understood both their value and their vulnerability. As the castle settled into its evening routine around her, Anne felt the quiet satisfaction that came from meeting a crisis with wisdom, courage, and strategic thinking. Whatever tomorrow might bring, they were ready for it. 3 weeks had passed since the crisis began, and Princess Anne stood in the same corridor where she had first learned of Tom Parker Bowles' attack on Kate. But the atmosphere in Windsor Castle had changed dramatically. Where there had once been tension and uncertainty, there was now a sense of quiet confidence and renewed purpose. The strategy they had developed had exceeded even Anne's optimistic expectations. Kate's enhanced charitable activities had generated overwhelmingly positive coverage, showcasing not just her dedication, but the tangible impact of royal patronage on countless lives. The legal warning delivered to Tom had resulted in an immediate cessation of his public comments, and the broader investigation into the Republican Reform Institute had yielded information that law enforcement was now pursuing independently. Anne was reviewing the morning briefings when Sarah arrived with the latest media analysis. The numbers told a remarkable story of public opinion transformation. The Princess of Wales's approval ratings have actually increased by 12 points since this whole affair began, Sarah reported. The extended hospital visit, the education initiative presentations, and especially the veterans' testimonials have generated more positive coverage than we've seen in months. Anne smiled as she read through the detailed analysis. Kate's instinct to respond to attack with increased activity rather than defensive withdrawal had been proven absolutely correct. By demonstrating rather than merely defending her commitment to royal service, she had turned a potential reputation crisis into a platform for showcasing her effectiveness. What about the broader family implications? Also positive. The public statements of support from Prince William, combined with the joint engagements you've arranged, have reinforced perceptions of family unity. There's been a notable shift in coverage toward emphasizing the collaborative nature of royal work. This was particularly gratifying to Anne, who had spent years trying to modernize the public understanding of how the royal family operated. The crisis had inadvertently provided an opportunity to demonstrate that individual royals worked as part of a coordinated team rather than as competing personalities. A knock at the door interrupted their review. James Parker entered with the expression Anne had learned to recognize as someone bearing important but not urgent news. "Your Royal Highness," he said, "we have an update on the Henderson investigation that you'll want to hear." Anne gestured for him to continue, noting that Sarah was also listening intently. "The Metropolitan Police have arrested Marcus Henderson and 3 associates on charges related to harassment and conspiracy to commit defamation. The evidence we gathered about their systematic targeting of royal family members provided the foundation for the charges." This was better than Anne had dared hope. The decision to treat the Republican Reform Institute's campaign as a criminal matter rather than just a political disagreement had clearly been the right choice. What about their funding sources? The investigation has revealed connections to several offshore accounts linked to individuals with known Republican sympathies, but also to some more surprising sources. It appears that some of the funding came from business interests that were concerned about proposed changes to royal patronage of certain industries. Anne found this information troubling but not entirely surprising. The intersection of political ideology and economic interest had always complicated efforts to understand opposition to the monarchy. Are there ongoing security concerns? Not immediate ones. The arrest of Henderson and the dismantling of his operation has effectively ended the organized campaign against working royals. However, we're maintaining elevated monitoring for any attempts to restart such activities. As James left to continue his security briefings, Anne reflected on how much had changed in just 3 weeks. What had begun as a crisis threatening Kate's reputation had evolved into a comprehensive victory for the royal family's public standing and internal cohesion. The door opened again, and this time it was Kate herself, arriving for their weekly strategy review meeting that had continued even after the immediate crisis passed. Kate looked relaxed and confident in a way that Anne hadn't seen for months before the attacks began. "Good morning," Kate said, settling into her usual chair with the easy familiarity that had developed between them. "I heard about the Henderson arrests. That's quite a development." "Indeed. It appears that our decision to treat this as a systematic attack rather than isolated incidents was correct." Kate nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about the broader implications of what we've learned. If there are organized groups actively working to undermine the monarchy, we need to be prepared for future campaigns that might be more sophisticated than this one." Anne was impressed by Kate's strategic thinking. Even in victory, she was focused on lessons learned and future preparedness rather than simply celebrating their success. "What did you have in mind?" Kate pulled out a folder that Anne recognized as containing one of her characteristically thorough analysis documents. "I've been reviewing the Henderson operation and identifying the vulnerabilities they tried to exploit. Their strategy was based on several assumptions about how we would respond, and I think we can use that understanding to make ourselves more resistant to future attacks." She opened the folder and pulled out several pages of notes and charts. First, they assumed that personal attacks would create family division rather than unity. Our response proved that assumption wrong, but we should institutionalize the collaborative approach we developed rather than treating it as a crisis response. Anne studied Kate's proposals for formalizing the coordination mechanisms they had created during the crisis. Regular strategy meetings, shared intelligence briefings, and coordinated public messaging were all elements that could strengthen the family's ongoing operations. Second, they assumed that charitable work was primarily ceremonial rather than substantive. Our response demonstrated the depth and impact of royal patronage, but we should systematically document and publicize these outcomes on an ongoing basis. This recommendation aligned perfectly with Anne's own thinking about modernizing royal communication strategies. The public needed to understand not just what the royal family did, but why it mattered and how it made a difference in people's lives. Third, they assumed that we would respond defensively rather than proactively. By increasing rather than decreasing activity in response to attack, We turned their strategy against them, but we should consider whether our normal level of public engagement is sufficient to maintain positive momentum. Kate's analysis was thorough and strategically sound, but Anne was most impressed by her evident growth in confidence and authority. The crisis had tested her in ways that normal royal duties couldn't, and she had emerged not just unscathed, but visibly strengthened. "These are excellent insights," Anne said. "Have you discussed them with William?" "Briefly. He's supportive of the general approach, but he wants to make sure we're not overreacting to what was ultimately a failed attack." This was a fair concern. The balance between learning from crisis and allowing it to drive unnecessary changes was always delicate. "What's your recommendation?" "Gradual implementation of the organizational changes, but more immediate enhancement of our impact documentation and public communication. The organizational elements can evolve naturally, but the communication improvements should begin right away." Anne agreed with this phased approach. The changes that could be implemented quietly should be pursued immediately, while more visible modifications could be introduced gradually to avoid drawing unwanted attention to their motivations. They spent the next hour reviewing specific implementation plans and timelines. Anne was struck by how much their working relationship had evolved over the course of the crisis. What had begun as protective support had developed into genuine strategic partnership. At noon, Anne received the call she had been expecting from William, who was returning to London that afternoon after completing his extended Scotland schedule. "How are things there?" he asked immediately. "Excellent. Better than excellent, actually. Kate's approval ratings are at an all-time high. The legal action has been successful, and the security investigation has yielded arrests and valuable intelligence about organized opposition activities." "And Kate herself? How is she handling everything?" Anne looked across her office at Kate, who was reviewing documents with the focused attention that characterized her approach to everything she undertook. "See for yourself," Anne said, walking the phone over to Kate. "Hello, darling," Kate said, her voice warm but also confident in a way that conveyed strength rather than mere relief. "I'm doing very well. Better than I've felt in months, actually." Anne could hear William's surprise and pleasure at Kate's tone. Whatever concerns he had harbored about the emotional toll of the attacks were clearly being dispelled by the evidence of Kate's resilience and growth. "I can't wait to hear all the details," William said, "and to thank everyone who supported you through this." "Actually," Kate said, "I want to talk about how we move forward. This experience has given me ideas about how we can strengthen not just our crisis response capabilities, but our overall effectiveness as working royals." Anne smiled as she listened to Kate outline her strategic recommendations to William. The transformation from attack target to strategic innovator was complete, and it boded well for Kate's future role in the family and the monarchy. That evening, Anne hosted a small dinner at Windsor for the key participants in their successful crisis response. Kate and William had returned together, their unity and mutual support evident in their easy interaction. Sir Charles Whitman brought updates on the legal proceedings that had grown beyond their initial defamation concerns into a broader investigation of organized harassment. Commander Reynolds reported on the enhanced security protocols that had been developed based on their experience with systematic targeting. As they gathered around the table in Anne's private dining room, the atmosphere was celebratory but also reflective. They had faced a serious threat and emerged victorious, but they had also learned valuable lessons about both their vulnerabilities and their strengths. "I want to thank everyone for their professionalism and dedication," Anne said as they began dinner. "This could have been a very different outcome if we hadn't worked together so effectively." William raised his glass. "To Anne, for her leadership and protection of our family. And to Kate, for her courage and strategic thinking in turning attack into opportunity." Kate smiled but also looked thoughtful. "I want to thank everyone as well, but I also want to talk about what we've learned and how we can apply it going forward." She outlined her analysis of the Henderson operation and her recommendations for strengthening their ongoing operations. Anne watched as William and the others responded with interest and support to Kate's strategic thinking. "The most important lesson," Kate concluded, "is that our strength comes from our unity and our commitment to substantive service. As long as we maintain those qualities, we can handle any challenge that comes our way." Sir Charles nodded approvingly. "The legal precedents we've established will also deter future attacks. The courts have now recognized that systematic campaigns against working royals constitute harassment and conspiracy, which changes the risk calculation for potential attackers. Commander Reynolds added his own perspective on the security improvements they had implemented. The intelligence gathering and threat assessment capabilities we've developed will help us identify and respond to future organized campaigns much more quickly. As the evening progressed, Anne felt a deep satisfaction with both the immediate victory they had achieved and the longer-term strengthening of the royal family's capabilities. The crisis had tested them in unexpected ways, but they had responded with wisdom, courage, and strategic sophistication. Later, as Kate and William prepared to leave for their London residence, Kate approached Anne privately. "I want you to know how much your support has meant to me," Kate said quietly. "Not just during this crisis, but throughout my time in this family. Your confidence in me has been invaluable." Anne was touched by Kate's gratitude, but also impressed by her grace in acknowledging the support she had received while taking full ownership of her own role in their success. "You've earned every bit of confidence I've placed in you," Anne replied. "And you've shown that you're ready for whatever challenges the future might bring." As their car disappeared into the night, Anne stood in the doorway of Windsor Castle and reflected on the events of the past 3 weeks. The attack on Kate had been intended to weaken and divide the royal family, to create doubt about the authenticity and effectiveness of their service to the nation. Instead, it had strengthened their unity, enhanced their strategic capabilities, and provided a platform for demonstrating exactly why the constitutional monarchy continued to serve a valuable role in British society. Kate had emerged as a stronger and more confident leader. The family had developed better coordination and communication mechanisms, and the public had gained a deeper appreciation for the substantive impact of royal patronage. The Republican Reform Institute and their hired consultants had achieved exactly the opposite of what they intended. Rather than undermining the monarchy, they had inadvertently contributed to its modernization and strengthening. The institution they sought to destroy had proven its resilience, adaptability, and enduring value to the people it served. As Anne made her way back into the castle, she felt confident that whatever future challenges might arise, the royal family was better prepared than ever to meet them. The crisis was over, but the improvements it had inspired would continue to benefit the monarchy for years to come. The ancient stones of Windsor Castle seemed to absorb this satisfaction, adding another chapter to the long history of challenges faced and overcome. The constitutional monarchy had survived revolution, war, scandal, and social change. It would certainly survive the failed schemes of Republican activists and their hired public relations consultants. Tomorrow would bring new duties, new challenges.